Okay. Um, Let me go over a couple of things. Okay, we'll go over a couple of things real quick. I sent a message about the midterm. I think I talked about this the intro class, but I might not have been recording then, so I want to just go over a couple of things. We will not have a final, um, mainly because of the questions on the study guide and the questions on the final. I've been trying to edit it, and I was editing so much, so I just decided it wasn't worth it at this point because we're basically stuck between editions of the book. Like some people have the 18th, some people have the 19th. The 19th is the current edition, but for a long time we've been having trouble getting it, which it sounds like some people are getting it now, which is good. So having said that, there's some questions on the midterm study guide that don't fit some of the questions from the 19th edition and some that don't fit the 18th edition. So what I've done is I've tried to go through and kind of take as many of those out as I can, but those won't be on the midterm either way. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knows that. I went on to the forum post and I tried to answer a couple of questions there too. Um, so I apologize for any confusion about that part. I am going to give another assignment in lieu of the final, but it won't be anything huge. It's probably going to be a reflection paper of some kind. I just haven't decided exactly what that means. In other words, it's going to be something comparable point wise to what the final was. The final was only going to be 25 points. So it'll be something comparable to that, which is basically actually less than the point total for the current exercises that we have. So I will do something for it. I just haven't decided what it'll be yet. Sorry, I'm just letting people in. They keep popping up. So okay. Having said that, the other thing, the midterm exam uh, will be open on the 19th. Now we got a couple of weeks for this, so the midterm exam will be open on the 19th. It'll run through the 24th, and what will happen is you'll see it on Moodle. There'll be a link there. You'll just click the link, and it'll take you to the online exam site. You'll just enter your information there. You create a username and password, and when you go on to take the exam, it's timed, but if you need to take a break or go do something else, just log out and it'll automatically stop the time and save your spot where you're at the time. And then when you log back in, the time will start back. And I'll probably mention this again, but just make sure that you actually log out. If you just quit and don't log out, the time will keep running. I've had students in the past that tried to go back, a day later and the time is over. You can't log back in, but just make sure you log out if you ever stop the exam. It's only 25 questions, multiple choice. It will come from the study guide or the book. You can use either one. And it's pretty easy if you do the study guide. If you don't do the study guide, it might just take you longer. Okay. I've graded the first exercise, part A. Sent those this week. And I gave comments to people that, like, if something was off, or I just kind of made comments as I went. In general, everything looked good. The one big general comment, and I think I put this in the message I sent, is when you're going through, if you'll just designate the section that you're talking about, like the review section, connect section, or reflection section, that just helps me kind of follow where you're at. It also helps me to know where you got that particular section from, like which chapter that you got it from. That helps me understand too, in case I need to go and look at something. That's just an organization thing for me. But other than that, everything looked fine. Everything looked great. Everyone did a good job. I think the forum posts have been really good too. I was just reading a couple about people parenting teenagers, which is actually what we're going to talk about today, which is good. Um, so what we're going to do today is we're going to have, I'm going to circle back to a couple of things I was talking about last class when it came to childhood and talk about parenting just as a way of introducing a couple of topics for today. So I'm going to do that this here in about 2 minutes, and then we're going to have I'm going to talk a little bit about um, adolescence, just a little bit at the beginning, and then we're going to spend mm, quite a few minutes in a breakout group discussing a couple of things that I think are really important clinically as a clinician, things that I see and hear when I work with families and parents. I've I actually probably work now more with I do a lot more parent type sessions now than I do with adolescents. I used to just only work with adolescents for a long time. Then I work with their families, and now I don't work with adolescents as much anymore, but I do quite a bit of work um, with families, including adult children and their adult moms and dads. I do quite a bit of work with that, but we'll talk about that when we get to the adulthood section. But we're going to have a pretty, I think, I think it will be a pretty good discussion today about a couple of different things, and I'm actually going to involve um, y'all's kind of knowledge from you, and we're going to kind of crowdsource here a little bit, and we're also going to talk about some research-based, evidence-based approaches to parenting along the way. And so, uh, what I'd like to do is have that. We'll kind of go through that whole area, and then at the end, with about I don't know 9 or 10 minutes left, I'll stop. And if anybody has any questions about like class related things, I'll stay until you guys have your questions answered. I realize that some of you might have to jump off, like if you have work or something else going on. That's fine, no big deal. That's why I record the class, and then we'll probably have people jumping in as we go. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back into a couple of things we were talking about last time. Let me get a couple things out of the way here. Got too many screens open. Okay. Last time when we were meeting, I kind of ended talking a little bit about parenting, or I was going to talk a little bit more about parenting, but I didn't want to really rush through it. There's a there's a this idea of parenting styles has been around for quite a while, and there's actually been quite a bit of research done into different parenting styles, and so we're going to spend our time talking about uh, some of these right now. In this case, this information really comes from those chapters in childhood where they start to introduce kind of parenting styles. Uh, and in my experience with this class, as we go through this, it's pretty typical for all of us to identify with one of these parenting styles. Either we currently use this parenting style, or that parenting style was used on us. And sometimes there's a mixture of those things. This isn't about like, oh, you're right or wrong. This is just I'm just going to give you the information and kind of walk you through it, and then we're going to transition to the adolescent world, kind of in this using these styles. So there's really kind of four different styles that have been identified, and there's obviously different ways to go about these. So for the sake of our class, this is what we'll use. When we think about authoritarian, authoritative, and there's neglectful and indulgent. And so I think one of the things that's happened is some of these styles the names have changed of them recently in our social media world, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But this is kind of the names that were given at the beginning. And you can look at if you wanted to, like, for example, I actually did this a while ago where I Googled like Mom Ride's parenting styles and got like, thousands of hits in little charts and graphs and everything. You can do that. You can look things up like that, and it'll show you different what different things look like. Um, but the authoritarian parenting is uh, pretty much the strict would be considered the strictest, the most kind of uh, the most controlling of any style. And then authoritative parenting still has boundaries and structure, but it's a lot more give and take verbally with kids instead of like this is the way it is. Don't talk to me about any other way. And then as we go through like neglectful, it's based that's the least parenting of parenting because it's kind of like I'm just kind of I'm not involved. You're just kind of on your own kind of deal. Um, and indulgent is kind of like, you know, kids don't really have a lot of boundaries and structures. There's not a lot of expectations placed on them. Um, and then there's and then there's consequences of all these that come. And sometimes those consequences don't happen, right away. Sometimes it's years later. And so all of these have kind of different structural components, and all of these have different consequences that come kind of later in life. Now, if someone has a neglectful parent, let's say, or an authoritarian parent, does that mean that they'll always be, you know, associated with social incompetence and lack of self-control? Not necessarily. We still have choices as we get older that we can change and do things differently if we're aware of it, which we can talk about as we go. The reason why I'm bringing this up right now is because um, it's a very interesting. Uh, it's very interesting to me right now, clinically speaking, when I work with families or adults that have kids, that when I start working with them, when I started doing this 15, 20 years ago, um, most of my sessions were kind of asking questions and trying to understand, what they were trying to do or what type of parent they want to be and that kind of thing. Now to me, the sessions have become a little bit more of, I read this, I saw this, I heard this, I was talking to so and so about this. I want to be this kind of parent. In other words, maybe 15, 20 years ago, it was like I kind of parent like I was parented, which still happens for sure. Now it's kind of like that, but it's more like I read about this XYZ style and I want to do that. And without really knowing that much about that particular style, other than what they've maybe seen on social media. Which again, I'm not bashing any of that. I'm just saying that's just kind of what happens clinically speaking. So it's really important for us as we think about evidence-based approaches to think about uh, and know how to uh, do our own research into what works in terms of like, hey, not just what works now, but what's best for kids as they get older too. And so and like I said, all of these styles have their own demands on them, but they also have their own consequences. Um, Authoritative parenting, which I I think has now been rebranded into gentle parenting, which is something that people might have heard of. It's kind of out there now. Um, I actually just Googled gentle parenting a while ago, and I got quite a few hits in Google, and actually got the top 15 TikTok parenting people that talk about gentle parenting, which I thought was interesting. Um, I think authoritative parenting has become gentle parenting. I think it's just been rebranded. But what they've also done is basically, you know, made it juxtaposed to authoritarian parenting. which is a little bit different. And so if we think about authoritative parenting, what the evidence and research tells us, it gives a lot of benefits to the kids and the families as a whole. It tends to be related and correlated highly with children feeling more comfortable socially. It seems to be a little more consistent and also a little bit more flexible over time and adaptable over time, which we also know is kind of important. But it also only really compares itself to authoritarian parenting for the most part, which which is also interesting because authoritarian parenting probably is still fairly popular with a lot of people because that was what has been around for a long time. And so it's very fascinating to kind of look at it from the standpoint of if we think about a parent coming into therapy that they're, whatever they're struggling with, probably, I don't know, 70% of the time it's because the other spouse thinks that they should come in and get help for their parenting style. That happens a lot. A mom thinks a dad needs help. A dad thinks a mom needs help. And usually that leads me to end up doing marital therapy most of the time with folks because and it's not that they're like in danger of divorce per se. It's just they don't agree on this. They can't agree on this. So there's three things clinically to think about. The first is evidence-based approaches to parenting. We need to know what those are. We need to know what the evidence and the research says. That's very important. Okay. We know that authoritative parenting tends to give the best results consequence-wise over time. The second thing that's important to know clinically is that when we work with parents and they're talking about anything to do with parenting, we also need to realize that we need to work with their responses to their kids and how they respond to kids. That becomes very important over time. And then the third thing, if we clinically think about when people come in, and I usually ask this directly, if they don't bring it up, hey, did someone ask you to come to therapy for some reason? And like I said, 70% of the time it's yes, my spouse or my partner said, I need help with these areas, which may or may not be true. That's just what's happening in a lot of instances. So those are three things that I think clinically speaking are kind of important for us to think about. And this goes under the category of my clinical experience, and I'm just talking about that versus what you'll find in the book. There's not going to be a lot of that type of discussion. These are just things that I find that happen. And this will happen mainly if you find yourself working with, certain sets of populations. If you think, I'm really only going to work with the child or the adolescent, some of this will be different. You're still going to kind of run into some of the same areas. But if you end up working with adults in any way, at any point, and they end up having kids, you're going to talk about one of those three things more than likely. Okay. And I think I mentioned this last time, because there's transitions that happen developmentally as you go from having children and they're, kids from, birth through 12, 13 years old. Then there's that transition when they become adolescents. That's another transition that happens. And that transition is probably, that just happens to be a little bit more, there's a lot more going on because of their age. And then the transition of them leaving the home. So you got some transitions that happen. So you have to be kind of mindful of those things. And we're going to talk about that as we go. Someone had their hand up, but then it just went away. I don't know who it was. Yeah, and you'll just have to unmute yourself when you talk.
It was me, Amy. I wanted to ask if gentle parenting is also called conscious parenting, which is kind of a buzzword right now.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Conscious discipline I've heard of.
Okay.
A lot of school systems using that. That's a great question. It's actually going to have something to do with what we're going to do as a class. I've never done what we're going to do today until today, but I think we're going to have some fun today doing a little research on our own. There's a lot of buzzwords. I mean, I think there's a lot of buzzwords. I think things are getting just kind of rebranded. So that is a great question. I wish I knew the answer to. Kind of makes it sound like it probably is, but I don't know. I wouldn't know. Um, okay. Now, having said that, I think that was all I was going to talk about. I'm going to look at it. There's a couple things we're going to talk about. Yeah, let me jump out of this one. I want to jump into one of the things that we talked about last time is this idea of um, self. So now we're going to transition from this idea of self into identity. And as we do that, we have to have that kind of view of self, like we talked about last time. And then when we transition into discussions about adolescence, that becomes more of a discovery of like our identity, of how we see ourselves. And some of that has to do with not just how we see ourselves, but how other people see us too. And then we start, as we move through adolescence as a whole, we start to also think about things we've learned, or belief systems that we've been around, and do we want to keep those belief systems for ourselves? Do we want to change anything? And that's when you see a lot of the kind of headbutting coming from um, not just parents, but just adults and adolescents, because there's literally like, you know, adolescents are trying to figure out like, hey, this XYZ belief over here, I've always been told it or taught it or modeled it. Do I want to take that on or not? And and that's why sometimes they experiment with other types of, belief types of systems, which is a normal process. Um, it doesn't mean that there's not consequences that could potentially come from some of that experimenting or discovery, but that is a normal process that happens, because that's a part of just that kind of like creating and discovering our identity, like who we are. So that's when you start thinking a lot more about esteem and self confidence, and how we interact with our peers, how we start interacting with other adults in our world. All of those things um, really start to happen. Let me do this. Now we're gonna talk about this real quick, and then we're gonna jump to our groups. So puberty is pretty much a fancy term for like sexual revolution inside of a person. Um, there's obviously biologically and physically tons of changes that are happening when we go through puberty, and it also is an awakening of a tremendous amount of brain activity from 12, 13 through maybe even the early 20s. And so a lot of times you might even have times where it's like maybe it's your teenager or other teenagers, and they do or say something, and you're like, I don't even know who you are. Like, I don't even know who this person is. That's because they sometimes don't know either of what's going on, because there's two times in our life that our brains are that active. That's that infancy up and through into toddler years, and then this adolescent time where your brain is just on fire. And it's different because it's not as like sponge like necessarily. Like those early years is when you're learning everything new, like everything's new. Not everything's not necessarily new. You're just deciding on like what you want to, like the paths you want to go, and the different hemispheres of your brain are starting to connect to each other. I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening for us. Um, the the timing of puberty has changed drastically, pretty drastically, over the past decades. Um, it's now very common for boys to start that process between 10 and 13 and a half, but girls to start at even as young as age 9 up until 15. That's become pretty normal. That is different than 100 years ago. It was a lot different, even 100 years ago. Um, Body image is definitely something that has always been part of adolescence. At the same time, the amount of preoccupation with body image has drastically increased, not just for girls, but for boys as well. It is still weighted more towards girls. Boys are definitely thinking about it too. And a lot of the research that I'm reading shows a pretty high correlation with kind of our view of body image and how much social media we're on. That's just pretty highly correlated. And so we also know that, like, if you have an early maturing kid or a late maturing kid, there's things that happen with them. Early maturing boys kind of see themselves more positively and more successful with their peers. Late maturing boys have a little stronger identity in their 30s, which kind of makes sense. If you have a lot of early maturing boys, which means they get taller, they're bigger, they're stronger, faster, that's just a view that they like, versus a kid that doesn't mature until maybe even after high school. That's when they kind of feel a little bit more confident. So that kind of makes sense. Early maturing girls show greater satisfaction early in their life, like higher self-esteem early, because they get more attention, positive attention from their peers a lot of times, versus they have less satisfaction later as they get older. And then all of these kind of risk factors that you can see. All this is in the book, and this is online on Moodle. I put both these on there. This one, so uh, so this idea, and we talked about this last time with this idea of prefrontal cortex, that kind of judgment, filtering, stop system, is really starting to develop, and will finish its development in the mid-20s, right around the mid-20s. The rest of the brain has really, I mean, obviously, really come on board, uh, but that the amygdala, which is directly connected to the limbic system, and as you can see, is not directly connected to the prefrontal cortex. So that's why a lot of times adults have to be the prefrontal cortex for kids, because it's not really connected in that way. But this idea that like emotions are, there's emotional swings in adolescence is very true, because that's developmentally one of the things that's happening. Um, and obviously it depends on environment. It depends on other interactions in their life. It depends on uh, if they have any type of disorder or not. There's a lot of variables that come into play. But there's always going to be kind of like swings, like up and down swings, for sure. Uh,
Can I interrupt for a second?
sure.
Are you seeing more effects to the brain and its growth and its ability to evolve and form the way it's supposed to with early drug use, with early drinking? I mean, how is that affecting the structure of the brain?
Well, it doesn't really affect the structure per se, but it affects how the brain responds and reacts, for sure. Um, um, like, for example, um, obviously, any substance that we take in is going to have an effect on us, no matter how old you are, right? So you're going to have an effect on you physically, mentally, emotionally. That's just true, no matter what. If you then uh, take into consideration that things that you take in also lower your ability to inhibit certain activities, on top of the fact that that's already lowered anyway, then that's one of the reasons why you do get, you know, kind of, impulsive behavior, reckless behavior, that kind of thing. If there is an addiction that occurs with any human being, I'm making all these numbers up. If someone becomes addicted, let's say with alcohol, they're 18 or 22 or whatever, or any drug, methamphetamine, heroin, um, anything like that, opioids. What happens with their brain is that there's a suspended state of development that will occur until they're out of that particular addiction. Um, doesn't mean that you can't catch up or that you're like stunted forever. Just means that you're somewhat stuck developmentally. Most of the time, it's an emotional development kind of you're kind of stuck. But you can still, as you get out of that, come out of that addiction, and then kind of make some changes, lifestyle changes, you can definitely, your brain can adapt pretty quickly. Our brains are very adaptable. They're very elastic for a long time. Even into the, our 70s and 80s, there's a lot of research pointing to the fact that, our brains are still elastic even as we get older. Now it's less elastic in someone that's 75 than someone that's 25 for sure, but there's still some elasticity there that's really important to think about. But the main thing about this time of brain development in adolescence is that there's just several key things that are happening all at once that can be delayed or, stunted for various reasons. And drug and alcohol use could be one of those. Trauma could be another one. Abuse can be another one. Certain abuse and trauma scenarios actually does change brain structure. We do know that for sure. Um, and so those are just other things to think about. Some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today will not necessarily focus on the kind of trauma effects. We're actually going to talk about that in our next class. But just in general, just generally speaking, um, this is just a very kind of wild, crazy time in our brain. And uh, I actually put a video from a lady doing a TED talk. I think it's on next week's line for in Moodle, but I would encourage everyone to watch that. It's really good. She has a really good job of kind of explaining this idea of adolescence and some of the research that she's done. And she actually talks about empathy a little bit more as well. So good. Does that answer your question? Hopefully. Okay. I do tend to go farther than people want. Sometimes I just keep going. Okay. Let me go back.
Dr. Chris,
Yeah,
I have a question since we're talking about the brain in adolescents and children.
yeah.
So, how much does uh, trauma has on a young child's brain, per se, like the cortex? I used to have a client.
Hmm.
She had she was about 8.
Hmm.
She had 6 surgeries
Hmm.
did on her head.
Hmm.
So even though I did read stuff about it, trying to understand, but does that affect the cortex later on in life? Since you say, the brain has electricity that
Hmm.
can, I know it can repair itself, but to probably how much extent can it repair itself?
Well, there's obviously going to be some things that are unrepairable if someone has traumatic, let's say someone has traumatic brain injuries of some kind. If there's actually damage done to the brain, or there's other, like say someone has a tumor or a growth or something. Like I've got a client right now who's got she's 20, I think her daughter's 22. She has It's technically a tumor, but it's benign, but it's in the part of the brain that they just can't get to, and it's very small. It's not really growing, but it's pushing on a certain part of the brain that affects her like motivation and energy and things like that. That is very similar to like people that have traumatic brain injuries that maybe have to relearn, certain things. Um, if there's not a physical if someone doesn't have something physically done to their brain, let's say that's an experience that they have, like a traumatic experience, like an abuse experience, let's say, that doesn't involve like an actual structural change to the brain. There is very successful trauma therapies that you can go through to help kind of work through and overcome those things. But if there's trauma on top of an actual, structural damage done to the brain, um, that's different. That's a totally different thing, right? Someone that, like, if someone has a stroke, for example, and a part of the brain is without oxygen for X amount of time, it's a strong possibility that part of the brain will affect a certain part of the body that might not ever change. It just might be that way. It's more permanent. So there is permanent damage that can occur to a brain for sure. Just like there's permanent damage that can occur to, any part of our body. That's true. If it's not a permanent structural damage, there are still ways to try to help people kind of overcome experiences that they've had. Does that make sense? So when you're talking about someone that's had multiple surgeries, that sounds to me like there's probably other things that are going on. That doesn't
Well,
mean that person can't, live their life or anything. It just means they're gonna have to make some pretty difficult changes probably.
she's had the surgery since birth.
Hmm.
So they went in her brain, literally, at least, well, when I was counseling, they had already went in her brain at least 6 times.
Yeah.
So she has from the center to the back, from ear to ear. So they really had opened up her skull at least 6 times, um, to release pressure.
Yeah. So that sounds like, so that would be like an actual medical condition that someone's has, and that's totally different than someone that goes through a traumatic experience that they can kind of overcome. That to me sounds very different. I mean, those are two different types of
No,
experiences.
when her mother was pregnant, her father kicked her mother in the stomach when she was
Hmm.
like getting ready to have her. And so that was a result, the surgeries was a result of the prenatal
Yeah.
trauma.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that type of injury, if it's a physical injury, then there's a lot more variables at play than if it's just you know, not necessarily a physical injury that occurs. In other words, it's somewhat easier for bones to regrow and repair than it is for a brain to repair itself. Right? A brain doesn't necessarily just repair itself.
Okay.
The elasticity I'm talking about is if you wanted to learn something different or change a behavior, you could do it. It would take work and it wouldn't be easy, but you could do it.
Yeah. Okay.
You can't regrow a portion of the brain that potentially has been damaged.
Okay.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. It's a good question. I want to talk a little bit about information processing real quick, because the ability to critically think really starts to come on board during adolescence. So this idea of black and white thinking is really kind of in childhood. It's really a lot of black and white thinking, which makes sense because that's kind of how our brain functions when we're younger. Then the ability to kind of think in the gray areas or kind of think maybe a little differently about things, that starts to occur in adolescence. Like your ability to kind of think a little quicker, process information a little bit quicker, um, have a little more breadth of content knowledge over certain subjects or domains happens in adolescence. You can kind of create and construct new sets of knowledge as you learn things. In other words, you can kind of take something and apply it in different ways. That starts to happen during adolescence. And then that just doesn't happen in adolescence. That's kind of when it starts. And then the other thing that is really kind of fascinating is that you can, like I was talking about earlier, start to, I'm going to say, challenge beliefs that you've learned. It's not challenge as in like necessarily rebel on purpose, even though there could be some of that. It's really just trying to figure out if you like the things you've learned and you want to take those in and believe those yourself. And that can be a long process for some kids and maybe a short process for others. It just depends on a lot of other factors. There's definitely some adolescents that grow up and are taught certain things, believe those certain things, and go into adulthood believing those certain things. And there might be other adolescents that are taught or believe certain things, and then they might change as they grow and believe something different. And that those two could come out of the same family. That happens with people all the time. And if we think about this clinically, one of the things that happens if you work with families, then you'll discover that a certain type of black and white thinking can occur, not just in families and marriages too, but with as we get older. And that is, okay, the way I think and believe and behave is right. And the way you think, believe, and behave is what? Wrong. Right? Right and wrong thinking can cause more conflict, not really help us get along. And so that's one of the things that happens as a result of, like, if we kind of think through and challenge our own beliefs or kind of think through how we believe certain things. But then we have a brother, sister, aunt, uncle, whatever, that doesn't really do that, right? And that's kind of what happens during this time frame, or can happen during this time frame, especially if kids are starting to think differently or have different views than their parents will say, or grandparents, or anything like that. It's like, well, you're wrong and I'm right. That type of thinking doesn't really help when it comes to relationship building. Now, bringing this up because that becomes a clinical issue that you will see. Any of you that decide to work with families in any way, this will be a common occurrence, right? Even if you decide you're going to work with marriages, same thing. You know, something as small as, oh my goodness, something as small as like how we do dishes. You know, how we load the dishwasher. I've had this discussion countless times. You know, I do it right, and this person, I've told them how to do it, they do it wrong. Like, for example, with our kids, they learned how to load the dishwasher. My wife taught them early, like how to load the how to load the dishwasher. And for a long time, I would come behind and say, basically, I didn't say this out loud, but showed them they were doing it wrong. Then I realized that was stupid. Let them just do it however they want to do it, because it doesn't really matter anyway. So I just let them kind of do it, and now they load the dishwasher and let them figure that out. But the way in which we respond and react has a big effect on what they're thinking and how they're thinking. If someone grows up, and I'm talking about over time, not just isolated incidents, I'm talking about over time, decades, years of time, thinking that basically everything that they're doing is wrong or not done perfectly, which might mean not done the way, I or someone else thinks it should be done. What does that do to a person? Over time, right? That's the people you'll be working with. Those are the folks that will be coming in clinically wanting to know why I can't do anything right. Under the guise of I don't do anything right. which is not true, can't be true. That can't be true. But that's the thought pattern. Does that make sense? So that's why it's so critical that we talk about things like this right now, because these belief systems, now we're talking about how we talk to ourselves, self-talk, what we believe about ourselves, starts in adolescence. Really starts in adolescence. If you live in a very critical environment, I'm not just saying necessarily household, I'm just talking about environment, could be any environment. If you live in an overly critical environment, right, that does things to your brain, right? So, for example, everyone here is an adult, okay? If I started if I started criticizing any of you or all of you, what would you do?
Log out for sure.
Be gone.
Good
Would
answer,
any of you,
Brody.
You said.
would anybody argue with me, come back at me?
No.
Absolutely.
Yeah, some people would. What's a 12-year-old do?
The same. I got don't you can go even further than 6.
No, I'm just asking, what do they do,
Well,
right?
Some shut down. There are some
Okay.
that do shut down, but then
Right,
the average is very combative.
right. So it just depends on a lot of different factors, right?
Well, they
Now,
internalize.
if we fast forward to now I'm in a relationship and that happens, then we got issues. Like it's easier for you guys to just, y'all don't have to be here. You know what I'm saying? Like you don't have to be here and you can leave and you know what I mean? It probably, if I started criticizing you, it might bother you, but I'm assuming it won't like upset your whole day because you'll just go do something else. I mean, you won't like it. You know what I'm saying? You'll probably get over it. But if that was constant, what if I did it every single time? And we're going to meet 5 times total. If I did it every time, I mean, you would stop showing up. You know what I'm saying? Like you would just check out, right? That type of feeling and internalization and thought process starts in childhood for sure, but it really speeds up in adolescence. Just like the opposite, right? If I am supportive of you, and if I am encouraging you, and if I kind of am not critiquing, I mean, not criticizing, but maybe giving critique, like a growth kind of, hey, I like this and this. Hey, let's work on these things, which is different than you're stupid. You'll never get this. You always do this wrong. You never listen. You do. I told you that, that type language, right? Versus, yeah, I don't think I meant to say it that way. I think I meant to say this. Let's work on these things. That's different. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like even our language matters. And if any of you that have teens or work with teens and you talk to them a certain way, they're not stupid. They know what you're saying. They know BS really quickly. They can tell that really fast. And they know if they hear certain things, certain tones, phrases, they can just that's it. I mean, they just know that, right? Not that adults don't, but I mean, it really starts coming on board in those adolescent years. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
That's why we're talking about these things. That's why this is important. Having said all that, one of the things that I've noticed not just as I've taught, but like work with people and probably this is with my own kids and their friends and that kind of thing. Because I've worked in the adolescent world. I think this is my 4th generation to work with from when I started. Because the generations are smaller now. They used to be bigger. They've gotten smaller. I don't know why. I even hate talking about generations, but I just do it just so for the sake of argument, you know. Because developmentally we haven't changed a whole lot, but our society has changed quite a bit in the past 20 years. I've just noticed certain things, and now certain people that I worked with, back in the 90s are parents in their 40s and they have kids that are teenagers. So, there's like a lot of things that happen over that time. And so one of the things that I've noticed, I don't know, over the past 5 or 6 years, and I kind of mentioned this early, is when I have clients that come to me now clinically and they say, hey, I heard this on, I saw this. Whenever they say they heard or they were saying, I usually kind of just take for granted that it's YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or something. I mean, that's where they've heard it, that's just our world. But that's where I started hearing these terms like gentle parenting and, whether it's conscious parenting or gentle parenting or whatever it is. And then the pros and cons and people arguing about it, all that stuff. I mean, that's all out there. I'll let them do that. What I want to talk about with us is, clinically speaking, for us to be aware of what's going on. I mean, this is what's happening. So this is a part of, I think this should be a part of our clinical training, is to be aware of what other people are hearing and experiencing and where they're getting their information. You should just be Google and Wikipedia. Now it's, any number of areas we can get our information. They're not reading peer-reviewed journals. They're listening to things and watching things. And again, I'm not saying that any of those things are bad necessarily. I think that a lot of people are trying to help people for sure. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, as clinicians, we need to be aware of where information comes from. Does that make sense? So my first question is, and this is an open question, you'll just have to unmute yourself and there'll be people talking over each other, and that's okay. We got a smaller class. We'll just kind of get over that. My first big discussion question is, how many of you have either read something, watched something, heard something that you thought, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, about parenting, about kids, about anything? How many of you heard something, read something, seen something, you're like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me? Has anyone done that?
On social media or for
Yes.
discussion?
Yes, social media, anywhere. Yeah. And what was it?
I'm sure it was in, I'm sorry, it's a little too much social media sometimes, but I'm sure it was someone on Instagram talking about how they'll do a lot of role playing. It's adorable actually when they do that. Like a parent is trying to talk to their kid and then the kid is talking back to their parent, and then they'll kind of explain situationally, well, here's where your kid's coming from and here's where your parents coming from and how we're going to meet in the middle and do what's going to result in the best outcomes.
Good. Yeah.
But it's my favorite though of Instagrammers or whoever that I'm listening to are the ones who will give me their credentials at the end. Like, I have a degree in criminal psychology and or I have a master's in homeland security, whatever it is. I always like it when people tell me where they got their information from. I like to know that they're kind of credentialed in that area instead of just a random.
Good. Anybody else?
Sometimes I have a former colleague. She'll send me things that she sees on TikTok where people are talking about their children when they had a confrontation with them. And yeah, sometimes I agree when it's just basic common sense. Because as parents, some parents get on there and vent their frustration when their children are not acting the way they want to act. And one old lady was on there saying, they really don't know. I would go inside their head and I'd just be laughing because, they have, like you say, this young generation have their own opinion, and they don't fear anything. And it's my way or no way. It's what I say is true, but you don't have anything to back it up. And well, I know more than you know at 15, but you just 15. And so when she send me things with parents venting their frustration, and yeah, I agree, but sometimes I'm like others. Oh, where you get it from? Do they have children to even give you that type of advice? And anybody can write a book. What they got behind their name? Then
Right.
my daughter and my son-in-law is like that. Okay, who wrote the book? Well, we read this book on parenting. Who wrote the book? Do
Mhm.
they have a PhD behind their name? Have they did any articles or anything? Well, now I say then, how you gonna listen to somebody that don't already have children
Right.
and they don't know what they're talking about?
Right.
So, I'm like everybody else. Tell me who wrote it.
Mhm.
What credentials do they have to even give you that type of advice?
Right. So let me address one thing too. And you, Angela, you're bringing this up, made me think of it. Right now, in y'all's academic development, you're in your adolescent phase of this profession where you're learning like new things probably all the time. Some stuff you kind of knew and you're getting that stuff reinforced for sure. It's not like you don't know, you know what I'm saying? It's not like you're coming here not knowing anything. You have lots of information, you have lots of experience, but you're probably learning some different things or learning about some different things because you're getting a lot of information academically, right? You're researching things, you're discovering things. And like I said, some stuff you already know, but then there's going to be things you're going to discover. And that's exactly what adolescence is, right? So for example, when I work in the practicum class, if I'm your, which if you go to Prac 2, I'll see you in Practicum 2. That's right before you get done with your OPC. I'll be there and we'll have this discussion, right? Where you don't know as much as I do in terms of experience, right? Now, what good does it do me to say you don't know as much? And Angela, I'm not saying you're saying this. This just made me think of it, what you're talking about right now. What the good does it do me as your practicum professor to say, man, you guys don't know anything? It doesn't really help anything. Probably makes it worse. Well, it's going to make it worse because, you know, and why would you come to that? Now, obviously, I'm never going to say that because I was where you were, right? I was the oldest person in my cohort by far, older than all of my professors when I went back to school by like 10 years. But I didn't know what they knew, right? But I knew that intellectually. And to Angela's point, when you're a teenager, you don't know that intellectually necessarily yet. Does that make sense? Which is really wisdom, right? Knowing we don't know everything is the beginning of growth. Does that make sense? Teenagers or
Yes, I
adolescents
can.
don't necessarily know that yet, right? Just like you
I,
guys are learning things all the time right now, knowing that I don't know everything. Now you're going to eventually, you're going to know. It doesn't mean you don't have experience. It doesn't mean that you can't help people. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. It just means that we're all growing and learning and changing. Does that make sense? Sorry, Felicity, I think I cut you off.
it, that's okay. It makes a lot of sense. And I work for a treatment facility with the prison system as a substance abuse counselor. And you see a lot of that. You see that they look at more of, they judge you from the looks based on perspective or
Yep.
your knowledge. And
Yep.
I think that becomes a big play in why you have so many depression issues in society, suicides and stuff like that.
Yeah. And that's a good point that you're bringing up. And if I transition all of this discussion back to a clinical discussions with clients that come in with amount of information they already have, right? Whatever they've heard or looked up or read, because people have already read stuff, y'all. There's no more of this. I don't know. They've read, they've looked at stuff, they've listened to things. You guys have probably done that before this class. You know, y'all know things even before this class. You have information about certain things. I don't teach this lifespan class anymore without knowing that people know what the prefrontal cortex is. That used to not be the case, y'all. You know what I'm saying? The world has information is not our problem. We have plenty of it. How do we use it? The reason why I'm bringing this up, clinically speaking, when you have clients that come to you, then they have already figured something out, but they need help with something. But I mean, they're coming to you for a reason. How do you talk to them? How do you work with them when they feel like they kind of already know what the answers are? Because they read it or heard it or seen it. Does that make sense? That's important to know. This is a skill that I think you should start working on right now. So here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to do. We're
Dr.
going to get in. We're going to get into groups, and I'm going to have you talk to each other about this very thing. And Angela, I'm glad you brought it up. It was a great segue because you're exactly right. Teenagers for sure, 100% know everything. I mean, they know everything.
Oh, well, what I was finna say just about what you said. I used to have a client. He was court ordered.
Mm-hmm.
He was 16. And he was like that, you know,
Yeah.
everything he watched on Facebook, TikTok.
Yeah, that's right.
And my question was to him, okay, how is it serving you right now?
Right.
Because you are court ordered. So with all this that you know,
Right.
are you in the predicament that you're in?
My assumption would be is because someone else did something to me and it wasn't my fault. Right? That's probably what he said.
You know it. You know it.
Yeah.
You know it.
The reason why I want y'all to talk about this is 'cause this is a very important skill, learning how to ask people questions about things they think they already know the answer to. Does that make sense? I'm not saying that people don't know themselves and that having information is bad. That's not bad. That's good. There's nothing wrong with that. But why are they coming? This is an area that I think is very important. When you work with adolescents, you're going to have to do this all the time. But now it's getting to be not just adolescents, it's getting to be adults. You have to know how to talk and work with people that know everything. Just for information, right? Like just know the information. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So I'm going to put you in groups. I want y'all to talk about that. And I'm including myself in this too, y'all. If I went to a therapist right now, I mean, it would be hard. I would be a hard person to work with. I would do it, but it would be hard. Like when I work with like I have had clients that are therapists, and it's not always easy necessarily, but I'm very open about it. But my point is, we have to learn how to work with people that have all this information. It's everywhere. Does that make sense what I'm saying? All right. So I want y'all to talk about that. I'm going to give you a few minutes to kind of talk. I know this is kind of a little unstructured, but I want it to be that way on purpose. How do you talk to people that kind of already know the answers to everything? How do you talk to people that use therapy speak? I've got tons of clients that use therapy speak. This person's toxic. That person's narcissistic. They're bipolar. I mean, all the words, right? I have trauma. Well, no, someone just cut you off in their car. That's not the same thing as someone beat you when you're a child, right? I mean, you know what I'm saying? All the words, all information. How do you work with people like that? Try your best not to make this a gripe session about those people, but how do you actually help those people? Okay? Now, let me put you in groups. I'm going to keep the groups a little small. Let's see. Let's do that. Hang on. Oh, shoot. We don't have an even number. Okay, we'll do that. Okay, you should see that pop up now. All right. Okay. Hopefully that was a good discussion. I'd love to hear what people talked about.
I'll go first. One of my peers had an amazing strategy whenever people start to have too much pre-work done, whenever they start to talk to you.
Yeah.
She said, let them talk until they're done talking.
Yep.
and be listening and waiting and listening and waiting. And eventually they will stop talking and then you get to respond. So that was a really good strategy. They will talk through it and then you get to come back with clinically and with our research.
Yeah, good. That's awesome. What else?
I discovered that one of the most effective ways, if they come in being know-it-alls, is to allow them to know it all, and then while they're at it, teach you what they learned from knowing it all and how you can learn it all as well.
Gotcha. Good.
Yeah,
Good.
I'm right there with Chandra, just staying inquisitive, asking all the questions, like they're the expert, they're the expert in what they've got going on in their life. So let them talk it out and then ask questions and maybe they'll catch themselves up, and some work can actually start to get done.
Good. Good. What else?
Letting
I
them
think
realize for their own selves that I really don't know all that I thought I knew. And that the people that I'm running with, they don't know it all as well.
I
I
think
think too,
sometimes
relationships, like if the relationship is there, they can take constructive feedback easier.
Okay. Yep.
And I think
Yep.
something I learned over the holidays, my husband and I both did from our oldest son. He's 27 and he is very invested in this war that's happening in Palestine and on the Gaza
Mhm.
Strip and with Israel. And he was able to teach us some things because we remained humble. And so I do think sometimes people that have that know-it-all attitude, they're not meaning to come off as harsh or impatient or obtuse even sometimes. We all have that family member that's kind of like, just stop talking already. But our son came with a very concerned, gentle, but somewhat impatience towards us because we weren't responding the way he wanted us to respond. We weren't being vocal. We weren't discussing it with him like we wanted him to discuss it with us. And we learned a lot. We ended up having one of our most meaningful Christmases and donated to Doctors Without Borders and UNICEF and ended up having a really great talk with our 9-year-old grandson about all of this. And so I think sometimes we can learn from those that are the know-it-alls, whether it's a family member or whether it's a client. Where are you
Yep.
hearing this? What are you reading? Let me look into this week. Let me get back to you about that. I don't think we have to have all the answers right then.
Good. Good. Anyone else?
I think in our group, I think it was Ruben. Ruben, correct me if I'm wrong, made a very good point about the validation, allowing people to speak, but giving them the validation of what they are speaking on. And then we talked about going a little further and then using questioning. So why do you think this is happening and applying it to real life? So maybe trying to make those connections, but also validating their thoughts and their feelings and their beliefs or whatever they are trying to convey to us.
Good. Good. I want to highlight a couple of things that's already been mentioned. There is a shift of focus that's happened in the clinical world over the last probably 50 years. There's models of therapy that were more modern in focus, where the therapist is the expert in the room and the client is not. The shift happened with more postmodern models of therapy, where the client's the expert of their life and you're not the expert of their life, right? So just like everything you guys are saying, just they know their life, they know who they are, they know all the things they know and believe. They're expert of that. So one of the reasons why I bring up discussions like this is because of that. If we go into our clinical work with understanding and knowledge, which we will have for sure, but also think we're the expert of that person, that's a different type of therapy. I'm not saying that those clinicians don't exist, because they do. There's plenty of clinicians that still follow that kind of modern, and some of you might more closely associate with some of those modern forms of therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is more of a modern form of therapy where the clinician is very directive, very in charge, versus some other forms of therapy. And this isn't a debate about what's right or wrong. Every therapeutic approach works about the same if the therapist that's doing that approach believes in the approach. So it doesn't matter what approach you use. Like evidence-based outcome research tells us that if I use CBT and Amy uses DBT and Misty uses narrative therapy, if we believe wholeheartedly in it, we'll all get basically the same outcomes. So that doesn't matter. What does matter is who's the expert of their life, which goes along with everything you guys are saying, validating people, listening to them, having a humble approach. It doesn't mean you don't know anything, doesn't mean you don't help them, doesn't mean that you can't ask questions, obviously, right? But even the comments you guys are making now, as you talk through it with each other, I think you should continue to have these conversations. It's going to be very important for you to continue to have these types of conversations with each other as you go through this program. Because what I was bringing up today is not going to change. It's going to keep happening more and more. And I was trying to be specific about, as a clinician, it does get tiresome when clients seem to already know everything that you're going to walk through, and they use therapy words and they use the therapy speak. It does get tiresome as a clinician, but that doesn't stop us from, helping people. It's just, that's part of our world now, right? And the reason why I'm bringing it up in this class is because developmentally, it's similar to how adolescents kind of think. That's the place that they're in. So all of the approaches that you guys just brought up, if you use those approaches working with adolescents, you'll probably have success. If you don't use those approaches, you won't have success, probably. Does that make sense?
So what do you do? Do you ever challenge your clients on certain things that are said, or is that a by feel thing?
Well, I think it's a good question. So it depends on the situation. If someone comes to you and they're talking about whatever they're wanting to do, I first of all want to know why people come. That's one of the first things I established early, like the first session. What brought you here? Did something happen? Did someone tell you to come? Whatever. I want to make XYZ change, or I want to work on this, or I'm anxious, I'm depressed, whatever it is, I want to know why they're there. And that's what we focus on. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if someone is stuck, let's say someone's stuck in a pattern, because I'm a systemic therapist, so I do systems type therapy. So I'm always looking for patterns and cycles and how to interact with those. If someone's stuck, but they don't see they're stuck and they keep talking in the same way, I might simply ask, hey, is that working? Like, tell me how it works. If someone's overly critical and they get stuck, there's a little technique you can use that sounds very confusing at first, but it works really well. And that's simply saying, well, how are things not worse than they are right now? Which throws people off, and they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, I mean, it sounds really bad. I'm wondering why it's not getting worse. That immediately makes people think about, solutions. Now, having said all that, you have to be mindful of your, one of y'all said this, I don't remember who. You have to be mindful of your therapeutic relationship. You know, if it's your first session, you're not gonna, I just listen and, man, yeah, it sounds, man, I'm so glad you know this stuff. I'm so glad you know this. Man, we're not gonna have to spend a lot of time on, you know, going through blah blah blah. You have a lot of really good self-awareness. That's gonna really help us. I'm so glad you know XYZ thing. Hey, what if we focus on these things? What do you think? Whatever. I mean, I just like what y'all are saying, you just kind of go with whatever they're going with. Because I'm a postmodern model person, right? Now, say you're a more modern person, you're more direct, and you want to be more in charge of the session. Some of you, again, might want to do that, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's okay to say something to the effect of, you know, I appreciate what you're saying. Is it okay if we talk about whatever? Pick one thing. Can we talk about this and go that direction? You don't have to be mean, obviously. You're not directive doesn't mean mean, right? Directive just means I'm going to try and kind of lead this conversation a certain way. Right? Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? It's kind of a long answer to a short question. You have to find your style, whatever your style is, right? So it's never too early to start discovering what your style is going to be. I don't think, personally. But I like talking about this, and I've never had these discussions in this class before, but it just kind of hit me that, you know, we're talking about adolescents that know everything, and I've got clients that know. I mean, this is our world. This is the world we live in, and I'm not saying this in a negative way about people. It's literally I mean, people read stuff, see stuff, hear stuff constantly, and we have to process it. And sometimes you're the processing wall that they're throwing stuff against too, and that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Now I want to show you guys something. I alluded to this at the very first of our class. We were talking about parenting, like different parenting styles. I'm going to pick something back up towards the tail end of our adolescent discussion next class, because we're going to transition into like the young adult world, which is still kind of semi-adolescent, semi-adult. So I'm going to transition from some of those things into the adult world next time we meet. But I did want to show you guys something that I was looking at. I actually just looked this up today because I was really curious about it. Let me see if I can get it pulled up. We were talking about different parenting styles, and this is true for children, adolescents, adult kid. It doesn't matter. Parenting is parenting. Once you're a parent, you know, you're a parent. So, or a caregiver, or a grandparent. I mean, I'm talking about, you know, like my kids have some of their friends that come to our house, and I feel kind of parenty to them. You know, you just kind of feel that way. So there's different styles that we do this. And we were talking about authoritative, authoritarian, neglect, those types of things. So this is really interesting to me. I got this directly from, of course, I just lost her name. Oh, she's the person that started talking about gentle parenting, wrote the book and everything. She's got a website, all that stuff. I got this directly from her. So I'm going to let me see if I can share this. Can everybody see that? Hopefully. I tried to blow it up, but as I blew it up, it got a little bit kind of. All right. So this is just her comparison. She just basically takes two parenting styles and is comparing them. Can you look at this and tell me basically what she's rebranding these styles? Like, what is she calling mainstream and what is she calling gentle? Based on the four styles that we talked about earlier.
Authoritative
Authoritative would be which one?
would be the mainstream. I think, just looking at the first few, not
Okay.
authoritarian.
Was anybody else? I'm just curious what you guys think.
Neglectful? Oh no, it's the other one. Is it an I? It starts with an I. It's not
Indulgent?
neglectful or authoritative.
Indulgent.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's what I think the gentle parenting is.
we call
Okay.
it helicopter parenting.
Yeah, yes.
I mean, that's kind of what it looks like. You're doing too much. You're
Which one? Which one?
the mainstream, you're doing all this hovering and controlling of behavior to get the action that you want out of your kid. You're overly involved in their life. Stickers and chore charts, and I'm going to reward this, and everybody gets a statue, or everybody gets a blue ribbon or whatever. And we've kind of turned these kids now soft today, where nobody can lose.
Y'all,
I
I can
can't
tell
stand the
y'all.
helicopter parent. Oh, I cannot stand the helicopter mom.
So
Please.
I think I have a different perspective, because,
Bring it.
and it's not because I'm not a parent, and I'm also a grandparent, but I'm also a teacher in public schools. And so when you bring the world aspect to it, because we're not allowed to do anything anymore in schools at all. So I don't see that gentle parenting the same way, because of my environment and the influence that it has had on how I parent, how I grandparent, and how I teach. I think of gentle parenting, according to this list, as all the things that allow me to be a parent in today's society.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying our way was right. Our way was
And your way wasn't
absolutely,
wrong. I just think
but
environmentally,
like,
things have to change.
oh yeah, for sure. I love the gentle parenting and this conscious parenting approach. I think it makes sense long term in just relationships.
I still battle with it. I'm not even gonna lie. It's a contradiction to how I was raised. And also it doesn't mirror how I raised my kids, but I've had to adapt and make adjustments to accept a lot of aspects of it because of how the environment and society is today.
All right, let me jump in. I knew this was going to happen. We've had 3 or 4 different parenting styles mentioned for these different examples. How many of you would say you were parented mainstream, the mainstream way overall? And I'm talking about overall, maybe not every aspect, but overall. I'm just curious. How many of you would say probably I was parented the gentle parenting side?
Well, I would say I was parenting the mainstream because my parents was military. So I was parenting under the authoritative. It's my way or no way.
Right.
So, but my parenting style is I don't well, authoritative, but yet it's still I learned each one of my children's personalities, and that's really how I parent, because each child is not the same, and I have 3. And even now with my grandchild, it's according to their personalities. That's how I, as the young people say, that's how I roll with them now. It's according to their personalities. Yeah, but I still use part authoritative in there, but I respect your personalities, and that's how I deal with you accordingly.
Okay. Does anyone struggle to see like the difference in these 2 styles, or can you kind of see it? And some differences are more subtle than other differences for sure. Like for example, um, praise lots when child does something that parents like, versus most praise seen as shallow and unnecessary, particularly outcome, not effort-based praise. That's a little bit of a subtle difference, but a pretty profound difference. Right.
Well, an example of that was my son taking guitar lessons from a teacher when he was elementary aged. And she would praise, 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 even when he made a mistake. And he said, Mom, I don't like it when she tells me I do a good job because I know she doesn't mean it. So kids are good detectives, just like we are. We know when somebody's BSing us. So praise that's undue versus praise that's well-deserved, kids pick up on it.
Hmm.
I honestly think kids pick up on it even easier than adults because we've gotten so conditioned by what society standards tells us is acceptable. I mean, we say good morning and everybody's like, oh yeah, it's great. And you may be falling apart. And kids, you say good morning, they're the first thing they're like, what's good about it?
Yeah.
I
So
think that they feed on it a lot better
yeah.
than
So the reason why I wanted y'all to see this is exactly kind of what happened. Everyone began to see this in terms of what, when you first looked at it, you saw it in terms of like, this is what something about me, right? Which is normal. I was parented this way. I think this is good or bad, right? We made a judgment about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. This is, I got the, it took me 2 minutes to find this on the internet. Right. It doesn't matter what you think is right or wrong. You're going to have people come in with, this is what I think, XYZ, right? Have an opinion, right or wrong. And you have to know as clinicians what the research says about these two things. Gentle parenting is authoritative parenting. It's just been rebranded. Now, there's aspects that are a little bit different for sure, but it's just been rebranded. Mainstream parenting is mostly authoritative parenting, mostly. It's just been, this person is calling it these things. Okay. Even calling it these things puts a little bit of a judgment on it and makes it kind of it just became a hot topic in here for 10 minutes, 7 minutes.
This is fascinating.
Right? Does that make sense?
Can I, Dr. Bernard?
Yep.
I don't know if I'm the only one that feels this way. But we're talking about how we were raised and how set in us that is. I think all of us are in different stages of being able to undo some of the thinking that we do know is not effective. And I'm saying this in jest. I feel like I need a class to undo some of the things that feel like they're in my bones, that feel like they're right, that may not or will not work, especially with adolescents today. Is there any tips that you have on, because I find myself just in this conversation struggling and questioning myself as a future clinician. Am I going to be effective? Like you pose the question of, when they start throwing around all these different terms, innately in my head, words have weight, they have meaning. You say what you mean what you say. I get caught up in the vernacular of things, and then whether it's right or wrong. And that's what I recognize I need to undo when I'm working with clients. I'm just wondering if anybody else struggles with that, or like, I'm just having this internal conflict of, gosh, am I really going to be able to be effective in today's world with how I've been raised, how I've had to work through. I've learned mostly what not to do. Just because I know what didn't work for me, and I still have these things that aren't working with my own kids right now. I've got adolescents and I'm struggling. I'm on the struggle bus right now. So to have confidence in my as a clinician to help other people, it's like I almost have more confidence helping other people as a lay biblical counselor at church and helping other families. I'm struggling with my own, parenting. So I guess my question is, does anybody else struggle with this? And like, how do you have any tips on like, I need to pull back on how direct. Yeah, I know we need to choose our what fits us best. I'm definitely more of a direct. I want to direct the conversation, but is that really what's going to help people? Like, I'm just questioning that right now.
All right.
That may be too big of a can to even address in this conversation.
All right. Two things, Julie. If I talked about this, I'd have to charge you $200. But let me just bring this up. Let me ask one question. Does anyone else feel some conflict or some like worry, does this make anybody else feel not mad, but I'm just like, oh, does anybody feel that way? Anybody else? I'm just wondering.
It makes
Probably
me
not the only one.
feel uncomfortable talking about it in some aspects of it.
Yeah.
But I was how Julie was 20 years ago. And the reason I don't feel as apprehensive about it now is because, like I said, I'm a public school teacher, and it makes you every single solitary day question how you were raised, how you raised your kids, how society is, the things that you've learned and the
Yeah.
things that you need to unlearn become
Yeah.
more in your face when you're dealing with it every day.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Let
it
me
is a little uncomfortable.
yeah, let me say this. If you are not uncomfortable, you cannot grow. It's impossible. We cannot be comfortable until we're uncomfortable. It's not possible. It doesn't work that way. So if you don't feel a little bit that's why if you don't want to be uncomfortable, don't go to school and don't learn something new because this is new, right? Now, having said that, the goal, and this is what I tell my clients, the goal is not to leave you in a puddle on the ground, every time we're just a big mess and I don't know anything. Don't, you guys don't forget, you know things. You have your intelligence, you have your abilities, you have your experiences. You can critically think. You have all of that. That hasn't gone anywhere. But there's going to be challenges, and I'm going to challenge you to think about certain things in a certain way for sure. That's going to happen. Now, this particular thing I just showed y'all, I didn't say anything. I just said, y'all look at this. And that's what happened. Within 7 minutes, it's like, I think it's this and this. And well, I don't like this, right? That's because we live in a judgmental society. And we don't usually judge positively, usually. We usually judge negatively. So, having said that, Julie, this is for you and everyone else that feels uncomfortable. What I want you to do is I want you to think to yourself, okay, what do I know about myself, quality, characteristic, that I'm like, I like this. I like this one. This is one I like. Whatever it is. Put that in your head. Can y'all get one of those? Just one characteristic that you like. Everybody got one? Now, how does that feel? Feels pretty good, right? Hopefully, right? That's all you're doing with your clients. That's all you're doing. Anytime our clients come in, they're going to be judging themselves. They're going to be guilty with themselves because they're overwhelmed with this freaking information everywhere about everything. And I did something wrong and I'm doing this wrong. What am I doing wrong? Chandra, what you're saying is true. What we're actually conditioned to do is to find the things we've done wrong. I can't even tell you how many. This just happened to me yesterday in a session. I don't even know how many sessions I've had where clients, men, women, it doesn't matter, have said, I don't want to be like fill in the blank. If we spend all our time thinking about what we're not doing or what we don't know or what we don't want to be, we're not spending time thinking about what we do know, what we want to be, and how we want to do things, right? So if I have a client, this just happened yesterday, again, I don't want to be like my dad. I'm scared I'm going to be like my dad, or I'm scared I'm going to, whatever. Well, what do you want to be? I don't know. Well, that's what we're going to talk about. What characteristics do you like about yourself? I have integrity. This is all stuff he was saying. I have integrity. I think I'm a pretty good learner. I'm a pretty good listener. I've learned how to, continue to try even when I don't do well. That's 4 things. I said, well, that's what everyone should want to, that's what you want to be. Does that make sense? All of a sudden, we're not talking about what I don't know, what I can't do, what I'm worried about becoming. Now, it doesn't change struggle, Julie. It doesn't change your environment. It doesn't change the fact that you're still on the struggle bus. But I'd rather you be on the struggle bus thinking positively about yourself than be on there thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know anything. That's just not true. It can't be true. It can't be true. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Dr. Chris, can I say, I was like that when I started my supervision. And then my supervisor, because I always, they ask you which group of people that you feel like you can't work with and the reason why you could. And I always said I didn't want to work with people like in jail or perverts or whatever, because I knew my attitude, I knew my mouth and stuff. But would you believe that's what most of the time, that's what my supervisor would give to me. And finally one day I just say, why are you giving me these people? He said, Angela, because you're growing. And I'm like, do you know how I struggle with this? But then I found that's people would, especially like in schools, the principal would call my boss and ask me to give me this particular client.
Right.
Because they seen how, and I'm saying how I was with the client, but I couldn't see that I was making a difference.
Because when we struggle with something, we automatically are going to grow. Now, I can't tell you how fast or when that will happen. I can't tell you that, which is another thing we struggle with in our world. We want to grow right now. Right. And Julie, I'm going to pick on you for a second, even though I know you don't mean what I'm about to say, but clients say this. I want to know the answer. Give me a tip. Give me the answer. Tell me what I should do, because I want to do it right now so that I don't have to what? I don't want to feel uncomfortable anymore. I don't want to feel this anymore, even though that's not how our brain works. Right? It takes some patterns. So this is research that just came out this past year, like at the end of last year. When you change your diet and your lifestyle and create new habits, dietary and lifestyle changes, it takes 2 to 3 years for those habits to become so formed that they overwrite the other bad lifestyle habits that you had. 2 to 3 years, not 2 to 3 days, 2 to 3 years. So what does that mean? Our brain doesn't change fast. It changes. Now that depends too on what the habits were, right? Like what you're trying to change. And yeah, like some stuff you can change quickly, like other things, but those particular things, depending on, because operant conditioning is how our brain works, right? Like our brain works off getting feedback, either positive or negative. That's how our brain works. So if you want to change something, you need to change the feedback that you're giving it. I mean, this is a whole, now we're getting all down the rabbit hole. This is very important because we need to realize that we're here to help people think through all of these things that we're bringing up today. And if we don't do it ourselves, it's harder for us to help other people. It doesn't mean you have to have it all figured out either, by the way. That's okay. I work with marriages. I don't have my marriage all figured out. It's okay. It's all right. I do stupid stuff. I say dumb things all the time. It's okay. You can still help people. All right. Okay. Now we have 2 minutes left. Now, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to actually, I'll just keep it recorded because people might want to see. If anyone has any class-related questions, like assignments or whatever, you can stick around. If you don't feel free to take off and go do other things. But I'll stick around for the next 10 or 15 minutes if I need to and answer questions. I think Misty's got a question. She's already raising her hand.
Yes, for exercise number 2, just want to understand that the way that the intent is for the structure, because I'm floundering a little bit. I think it's, what did you learn from this exercise? Meaning the paper that we're turning in today, we're going to say kind of a synopsis of what we learned. And then what role does socio-emotional development play in the stage of development that you chose? So then we kind of describe, so that's review, then a little bit of a connect. And then at the last question, how did you experience socio-emotional development during your adolescence? So that's asking us to reflect, to target that specific category of like, and what was our development socioeconomic. Right? That's how it's intended to be responded to.
That sounds right. Let me look, make sure I'm telling you right.
So that's forum for exercise number 2, do.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay. And then we're to respond to 2 peers.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
There's one, someone's already beat y'all. Someone's already put their form response up. So that person
What's-
automatically gets 100.
Is
So
that your
kind of-
grading policy?
No.
Did we kind of skip ahead because I haven't read anything about adolescence yet. I'm still on childhood development. So are
It's okay.
you want us to jump ahead and
No, you could,
that?
I think you could still answer it either way. So I ask basically what the first question is, what role does social emotional development play in the stage that you chose? So if you're an adolescent, let's say you're choosing a childhood section, you can still answer it. But the third question is, how did you experience social emotional development during adolescence? You probably could still answer that too. I'm assuming, because that's more your, in other words, there's not a wrong answer for that one, right? That's a reflection. That's whatever you think. Does that make sense? I
Yeah.
tried to word the question based on it, so it doesn't matter like necessarily where you were, because some people do read ahead, some people don't, and you can do it however you want.
I'm a slow reader, so I read
Okay.
right on time.
No, that's okay. And there's a lot, and the book's big, and there's a lot of words.
My
In the words of
questions are-
in the words of Nate Bargatze, it's like the words is just a lot of words. Yeah,
I
Chandra.
had 2 study guide questions. Is that okay to ask now?
Sure, sure.
Okay. For chapter 9, number 14 says, which of the following statements about children and cardiovascular disease is true? None of these were in the reading. The
Don't even
option.
worry about that.
Oh, okay. Well, the second one, it says the incidence of cancer in children has blank in recent years. None of my A, B, C, or D were in the reading. None of these options on this study guide.
Don't worry about that one.
Okay.
Even though, what's the answers? What's the answers to that
The
last
answer
one?
says, the incidence of cancer in children has A, been linked to obesity in recent years, B, linked to increased dramatically in recent years, slightly increased in recent years, or decreased dramatically in recent years.
I think it's C. But don't worry about it.
Okay, okay, slightly increased. I'm gonna go ahead and mark it just in case it comes up, but it wasn't worded that way.
It's either A or C, but I'm like 9% sure it's C.
Okay.
Can I ask, Sandra, which edition you using?
19.
Yeah.
I've got edition 13.
It's in
That-
13.
Edition 13, that's where I'm finding most of my answers.
Ah, okay, okay.
13. Oh, good. 13. Oh, good.
Even though I'm printing out 19, but you going through the study guide and finding the answers, most of my answers I found in edition 13.
Thank
Well, that's
you.
weird because I did the study guide for edition like 17, I think. So that's weird that it's in 13.
Because
Yeah,
the
it
only
was
difference
tough.
is the later ones, they just added more research information,
Yeah.
but the most part what he talks about is just about really the same, maybe 1 or 2 sentences, but as far as the answers, that's hold on a minute, I'll show you the book. It's 30.
Yeah, I did this study guide is a combination of like 17, 18, and 19. And I've been
Okay.
trying to like whittle it down, but
Appreciate you.
yeah.
What question was that? What
It
question?
was chapter 9, questions 14 and 17.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
14, don't worry. Well, you don't have to worry about either one of those. I can tell you those aren't on the exam. Any other questions class related?
Do we, the research paper that's coming up, when are you going to give us more information about that and topics that might be interesting, or is that totally open?
Totally open. I'm gentle parenting that. Totally open.
Dr. Bedard, I just wanted to thank you for the format that you're doing. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I definitely have learned a lot just from our conversation today, and thanks for addressing that.
Good.
Agreed. We
Thank you.
appreciate that you're giving us 2 hours every week.
Yeah.
Well, every couple of weeks, but
Yeah.
it's time well spent. Thank you.
Good. Good. Well, I'm glad. Hopefully it's good.
But I do have a question.
Yes.
How many points you take off for being late?
It depends on how late. Well, how late?
Just a date. Because I've been sick.
I'm
Well,
not
I'm
gonna take.
sick I put it like this.
I'm sick as a
Uh,
dog.
I have a hard problem, and I thought I had it under control until I got upset. And this past week, I can't get it back in rhythm, the right
Oh,
rhythm.
you're arrhythmic. Yeah. So yeah,
Oh.
don't worry about that. I'm not gonna count off. I mean,
I'm
I'm
gonna try to
pretty.
get it in tomorrow.
Yeah.
And my nitroglycerin is not kicking in right. It's just not doing me right.
I'm not gonna be mean about anything. You get it in when you can.
Okay, thank you. But I picked. I just hadn't put it down on paper. I'm looking at. I want to talk about the chapter where it's talking about birth and I had a sister-in-law. Well, I still do. She would go into diabetes when she got pregnant. So that's the I think this chapter 3 or 4. That I want to talk about that. And she had to end up losing 2 children before the doctors really found out that she was going into
Gestational diabetes. Mm-hmm.
when she becomes pregnant. She
Yeah.
miscarried, and then the second one died coming out of the canal because the umbilical cord. And so I wanted to talk. I wanted to use that chapter.
Yeah.
On this exercise.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It makes sense. It makes
Okay.
sense. Yeah. But yeah, you got if something comes up, just let me know what comes up and why something's late. That's all you have to do.
Okay. I got too upset. I got too. We talking about getting along. I got to adjust now, dealing with adult children.
Yep.
And
Yep.
showing them respect. And I just got too. My medicine is not helping me right now.
Sometimes we got to walk away.
I have to remember that I'm trying to still respect them. Yeah, they're my children, adult children, but I'm trying to give them the respect of being an adult. But the authoritative parents still come in. Don't forget, I'm still your mother. Don't get crazy, but
Sure. Yeah.
I can't whoop you now. So
Yeah.
and be holding it in when it's not helping me none. So.
Yeah. You need to take care of yourself.
Right? I was just about to say, sometimes taking breaks from whatever is stressing you is a form of self-care.
Absolutely. Nothing wrong with
Self-care
that.
is going to be your best friend right now.
I got to let it go. I got to. Okay.
You're probably not going to be able to let it go. You're not going to be able to let it go, but that's okay. Just to walk away and let it go.
I'm
It's
gonna
okay.
let it go. But when it's affected, my medicine's not doing me any good. Like I said, I popped nitroglycerin 2 nights in a row, and it hadn't
Yeah.
helped. Yeah, I got to. I'm
Take
gonna
care
let
of
it.
you take care of yourself.
Sure.
Anybody else have any other questions about anything? Okay. Now y'all gonna do something else. I'm gonna go take a nap. 'Cause
Fantastic. Enjoy.
it's a nap day.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye everybody.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good
See you in 2 weeks.
weekend. Bye, you guys. Thanks.